welcome to Carlos and Lisa. I'm Lisa Remillard.
And I'm Carlos Semeskowitz. Nice to have you with us. You hesitated there on the hello. I thought something was wrong.
I know, I did. I don't know why. It just came to me.
Hello.
I don't know.
Everything okay? Are you good? You're good?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm here. I'm ready to talk about this because this is important to me.
Yes.
And it's important to a lot of people that I know. Because
we have to live here.
And nobody can afford to live
Southern
here.
California, the sunshine, okay, is wonderful, but we pay a sunshine tax because the sunshine tax is getting more and more expensive, especially when it comes to buying or affording any kind of place to live.
So a recent report, I read this and it blew my mind. A recent report said, if you want to live here or rent here in the Southern California area, you have to be making $47 an hour.
Really?
To afford the median rent price. Fun fact, minimum wage, not there.
No.
Or anywhere close.
No, not at all.
So 1/3 of U.S., and let's talk about people that own homes.
Okay.
1/3 of U.S. households spend way more than the typical 30% of their income on housing.
I don't think I've done that since 1980 something.
What? You haven't done what?
That the balance of what you pay for your house as opposed to other expenses. There used to be the formula, but the formula's out of whack here, completely out of whack. In fact, middle income Americans are struggling. Low income Americans are basically ending up on the streets. We know what the homeless problem is. Of course, lots of politicians have tried to address this crisis. In fact, in the first half of 2019, members of the California State Legislature introduced roughly, get this, 200 bills to fix California's worsening housing crisis. Geniuses, what's going on here?
Well, why is it not getting fixed?
It's
obviously an acute problem here in Southern California, but it's being felt everywhere.
Yeah.
So we wanted to bring in an expert to talk about how we got into this mess and perhaps how we can get out of it. Dr. Matthew Fienup is here. He's the Executive Director of the Center for Economic Research and Forecasting at Cal Lutheran. Hi, Matthew.
Sounds like you know what we're talking about.
I'm living it.
Tell us, so what's your analysis? Kind of give us a big picture, and then we'll get a little bit more granular.
So the problem is as big as we feel every day, and as big as 200 pieces of legislation might indicate. The housing affordability crisis is not only driving individuals and households from California, it's now driving business location decisions. And it means that the outlook for the regional economy here in Southern California and for California at large is diminished unless we get serious about solving the housing shortage.
I know politicians, Carlos and I have interviewed them repeatedly about this issue. Is it a silver bullet that can fix it? Is there one way they can fix it, or is the problem so massive that you need to take it in pieces?
Well, so I've actually been pleased by the attention that the issue is getting in Sacramento, politics are political, right? And so we're never going to see a perfect silver bullet piece of legislation. So I appreciate the attention. The problem, especially in communities here in Southern California, is really a local one. What needs to change is attitudes about economic growth, about residential development.
You mean the people that are saying, not in my neighborhood.
Not in my backyard, right. Yeah. So people have to get serious. To solve this issue means building more housing. And it means building more housing near our own neighborhoods.
But let's talk about the cost of creating housing, because if you go to a typical, let's say to LA County, they have fees, taxes, all kinds of things that get in, like in San Diego, for example, 50% of the cost of a house are fees. What is the point of that?
No, certainly fees, all of the regulatory burdens that can be erected to slow or halt development, these are all problems. But the reality is that a huge number of developments die in city council chambers or in planning commission chambers. And it's because people show up and say, I don't want this in my backyard. And so I agree, we can do better on the policy front, we can do better in terms of legislation, better in terms of permitting, but we also need to look deeply in the mirror and say, really, how serious are we?
But here's I would imagine from their perspective, they're saying, I paid a boatload for my house, and I don't want somebody living on top of me in a huge high-rise right next to my single-family home. So how do we address that and still keep those people happy?
So there is one piece of legislation that came out of Sacramento that seeks to drive infill development along transportation corridors, right? Mm-hmm. That is common sense, smart growth development that we should all be able to support, right? Mm-hmm. So there is no doubt that there are ways to address this issue, that sort of balance the needs of individuals and the desires for the character of their neighborhood and the needs of the broader economy.
I've made no secret of my disdain for California politicians, especially the ones in Sacramento, and the way they misspend our tax dollars and the way they allocate the funds and their desire to constantly tax us and tax us and tax us till we can't even afford to live here. And I think there's got to be some wholesale change. Yep. And I know we can change it at the ballot box, but we seem to not do that. But yet they're not willing to say, you know what, mea culpa, we caused part of this problem. Yeah. And they can't seem to fix it. So 200 pieces of legislation to do what? To continue to do what they're doing?
Yeah, and just to give you a sense of how big the problem is, we have a policy called CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act.
We know
and obviously, we have extraordinary environmental amenities that are, natural resources that are worth protecting, and CEQA was very progressive for its time. But the reality is that more than 90% of CEQA lawsuits are pulled inside existing urban areas. They're not protecting the environment, or they're actually used to halt development, halt construction. And so one critical piece of legislative reform would be CEQA reform. And it's being talked about in Sacramento. It has been identified as a necessary condition for addressing the housing crisis. We just haven't gotten there yet.
But then all the environmentalists, if you start messing with CEQA, they're going to come and say you're going to ruin the environment. Yeah. Right, that's what they're going to say. But here's the thing, is there's always a but. Yeah. Uh-huh. And the buts that we keep coming up with are prohibiting developers to make these affordable housing units available so we can get people off the streets so people can find a place to live.
Yeah, and to be clear, we need to build housing of every single kind. Yes. We need multifamily, single family. We need family for lower income, middle income households, the workforce, right? The police officers, the teachers, the nurses, that sort of.
There's a bill, one of the 200 that's making its way through the legislature here in California addresses rent control.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, there's always two sides to that rent control.
There's not two sides to rent control.
Yeah.
There's only one side.
And that is?
And that is that, and actually there was a study recently of rent control policies in San Francisco, and the way that policy was implemented, it provides a neat sort of natural experiment where rent control applies on one side of the street and not on the other. And the conclusion is that rent control increases rents and it by decreasing the supply of housing, right? And so it doesn't even achieve its most basic goal. And there may be a very select few who live in a unit for 30, 40 years who are individual beneficiaries, but there is no doubt that the entire city of San Francisco was harmed by rent control.
That is a fascinating perspective.
Really interesting. So, since there's no silver bullet, what would be kind of a step-by-step solution to solve this problem, in your opinion?
Well, again, CEQA reform would be great.
That would be okay.
Again, some of the legislation that's being talked about, concentrating infill development along transportation corridors, giving expedited permitting processes, administrative review so that these can't be voted down in city council chambers, that sort of thing. These are all positive developments. But again, what really has to happen is that neighborhoods, communities have to rise up and decide to do the right thing, allow development in their backyards.
There's one thing he left off. We could also give ourselves a big raise. We could all make $1 million and then we can afford to live here.
Or they could reduce some of our taxes. That'd be nice.
No, they're not. They're never going to do that. So we have to ask our bosses for more money.
Producer Amy, we need more money.
Can you talk to the university?
We'll talk to
Cal Lutheran as well.
That seems to be the only solution that makes sense.
It's crazy.
It's crazy when you think about that.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, Matthew, thank you so much for coming in.
Great to have you here.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your perspective on this.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back.